I want to be the driver as much as possible, yep, because it's so much fun. To get into the driver's compartment, you gotta be kind of flexible. And man, alive, I can barely do it now. I gotta be much, much more flexible. I gotta lose some weight and I gotta exercise. But it's gonna be fun.
Thanks for joining us for Richard Ha's blog, What Would Our Kupuna Do? I'm Leslie Lang, and today we are talking about sampan buses, and particularly one that Richard owns and is restoring, which is really fun. So Richard, I know sampans ran in Hilo from, I believe it's 1915 until 1975. Tell me your memories of sampans. Did you see them and ride them, and what's your background with them?
Yeah, when I was intermediate school, we lived in Waikeuka, just below the gym. And so periodically we'd go to school on the sampan bus. I remember it very clearly, jumping up, hitting for the back of the bus so that you could see in front. I don't know what it was. For our age, we just all rushed to the back of the bus. And then the other people, the adults, were on the other seats facing each other.
Now they seem so unusual to us. Was it just a part of the landscape? Was it just an ordinary thing that you never thought twice about? Or
Well, at that time, it was the only source of transportation to get to Hilo Intermediate School. And it was like that until I got a car. And then, of course, everything changed. But prior to that, that was the transportation. There wasn't any formal bus system. That was the bus system.
And how much did it cost?
I don't remember what it cost because it must have been very little, to the point I'm thinking 10 cents.
And how did you come to buy one? Tell us that story.
At the end, when they finally got around to getting a regular municipal transportation system, they put all the buses that was in the old system on auction. I think there were 7 of them. And so I bid on one of them. So I went there with June's dad because he was a hot rod enthusiast. So in other words, he'd take them apart and put them back together. And, he just knew hot rods. So he gave me advice and he pointed out this yellow and brown bus. And he said, bid on that one. That looks the most authentic. So that's how I started. And actually, it was the first bus to be auctioned. And so when they asked for bidders, I bid.
Oh, that's neat. Now, did you tell me once that it had been owned by Lyman Museum?
Yeah. At that point, yeah, it was owned by Lyman Museum when they pulled all of them together.
I remember riding in your sampan bus once many years ago. It must have been like 15 years ago or something because my daughter was really young at the time. So it'll be fun to see it after it's restored.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah. I like the sampan buses mainly for the reaction I get from the people who actually knows about it. So they're mostly senior people, yeah. As soon as they see them, their faces just light up because they have memories, yeah. Yeah, it's really special.
Yeah, such an interesting part of Hilo's history.
Yeah, it's very unique to Hilo, yeah?
Yes, very unique to Hilo. Now, tell me how you met Tim Mann. Let's bring Tim Mann into this story.
Yeah, I was searching around for someone to help me restore it, and I've been looking for several years. It didn't really quite fit into a hot rod category. It's a little bit more involved than that. So how Tim Mann got involved, we had this conversation that I remember thinking about, okay, Tim Mann, I realized that he used to do boats. And what came to my mind was with boats, you cannot fool around. It's life and death because you got to put them together. There's no room for error. And so I thought, okay, outside of just the regular mechanical things that run it, everything else was wooden and everything like that. I knew that Tim Mann knew that stuff really, really well. And I actually didn't know anybody who had any idea on how to do the wood part. And I knew Tim from before, yeah, so I knew he had done many other things.
He's an interesting guy. I was fascinated to learn that he's the guy with the house as you're driving up the Hamakua coast, and on the right for so many years, there's been that crane holding the big lit up star at night. Everybody who's here will know what I'm talking about there.
Yeah.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah. And it hasn't been there for maybe a year or two, and now they're talking about hanging the star back up.
Yeah, I think he said they're going to put that back up because people keep asking him about it. I love that. I love that.
Fukumatsu Kusumoto was a Hilo taxi driver in 1922. And apparently what happened was people were saying, your taxi costs too much. So he was on the search for a taxi that could take a whole lot of people and not have to charge him so much money. So he built the first Hilo sampan bus out of a Model T, and it was a resounding success. And he started the Hilo sampan bus company as a result. Apparently had a small fleet of them, and then they just took off. They went crazy. Everybody made them, right?
So what's it like working with him? How's that process been? So he's taken the sampan and he's just restoring it from ground up, and what's that been like?
I really enjoy working with them because you know where they come from, inside of who they are. You know, like the Lahaina fire came up. They were working. You know, the whole family was working on the bus, but you know they jumped up and they went to Lahaina to help them. And I really like that because you know the values. I said, oh sure, I'll wait. You know, for something that important, I'll wait, sure. But that's how they are, yeah. And another thing makes me laugh. I'm a person that you know kind of after a while I started realizing, you know, this whole world that we live in, we got to make sure we take care of all the living things in it. You know, we can't just ignore animals and stuff like that in the environment just because we're humans and we like to do what we like to do. But when you go over to his place, you know, the the animals are really funny because they're over there. They live right there. He took a picture, and in the picture, you see the goats and stuff like that, and you kind of laugh at the geese. But if you look closely, on top of the roof is a cat. You know, it made me laugh.
It was interesting hearing Tim talk about how the sampan was originally made of parts from several different cars.
Yeah, and you know, and it was a detective work to find out what that bus was made up of. You know, when you realize that the front tires and the back tires had different lug patterns, so you would have to have two different spare tires because they wouldn't fit. Now you had to figure out, okay, why is that? And then what is the engine? Okay, then you know, and he did a lot of researching to find out what those things were.
It's parts from all these different kinds of cars
Because we love Portuguese bean soup on the Big Island. That's why. And what Portuguese bean soup is, you look in the refrigerator and you make soup out of everything that you've got, and you make it taste really good, right?
And then the engine was backed into the driver compartment so that you could actually see the motor. And now he had to put it back together so that you know you kept the front end different from the back, so you don't have anything that's coming out of the engine would get into the passenger compartment. But it was really fascinating how all that was. So now I had to decide, okay, my main objective was, of course, to make it look good. But actually the main objective was to make sure it was safe. So I had to make sure first we tried to do disc brakes. That's what we use now. So that's the modern way of for the braking system to be good. Because we couldn't get that to work, we had to use regular brakes. But the brakes he got was way bigger than the average brakes. So now I feel kind of safe that way.
I think he said he finally decided that the most recent part that made up that car was a 55, so that it was put together probably after 1955.
Yeah, something like that. So there were so many different parts and pieces. It's just mind blowing trying to keep it all straight. And to complicate matters is, you know, the back part of the bus where the people sit. How do you make it so that it's tied to the frame really strong? So what he did was he looked at it and he made it even stronger than it was when it was running. And when you look at it, you feel like, oh wow, if you had something to lift it by just the roof, you pick the whole thing up, no problem. It's so solid.
That's great.
That's how he thinks, yeah.
It strikes me as interesting that a lot of your philosophy and how you look at things is looking forward and what we can do to improve things looking forward. But in this project, you're using something that's looking back.
Yeah, you know, it's looking back, but it really is for a purpose to look forward. And how we're going to do that is if you look around at all these nonprofits that exist on this island, they all want to do good. That's what nonprofits do. But a lot of them are independent. They are in silos. They're not communicating necessarily with a whole bunch of people. So I'm thinking maybe we can use this as a way of bringing everybody together. We may not agree on everything, but there are certain things that for sure we can agree on, which is basically taking care of people in general. Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out how we're going to use this as a way to bring people together. And I think what I might do is approach the other nonprofits and ask them if they'd like to go take a ride on one of these, on one of the routes in the sampan bus. So then they can decide who would go in there. And then our condition would be, okay, but you got to listen to the story then. So then we'd say, okay, you got to listen to Brittany Zimmerman because she has this idea about utilizing waste to energy and cement and other these things, which has a net negative effect on the climate. That's one thing, but that's in parallel to what we want to do. And then they got to listen to what would our kupuna do, the basic story of what we're trying to do, which is modern day ahupua and our culture center about the clouds. So we get a chance to explain that part. And then if they agree, so well, okay, just press the button and subscribe. subscribe, and then you can be kept up to date with our vlog. We're trying to use this as a way to get people to understand what it is we're doing, which is trying to make life better for future generations.
And then he said it might be finished in another month or so, which is pretty exciting. What will you do first?
Well, the first thing is I asked you to get her friends together and they can take the first ride. The second thing is we want to get our family and the friends that are real close in, because we're going to start with family first, and then from there we'll kind of take different groups. I really understand how important this is to keep this part of Hilo's history alive. We're really fortunate to be in this position to be able to do this. It wasn't planned from the start, but as it developed over the years, became more clear that that was what we needed to make sure we did.
It's a great way of tying together the past and the present and the future and all the things that are important to you. I think it's really exciting.
It would be good fun.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks everyone for watching us here at the What Would Our Kupuna Do vlog, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, aloha.